Well, guess what? Everyone's least favorite necessary evil is in the air again. Elections. Lots of Canadian cities have mayoral elections, the US is in the middle of midterm Senate elections, and who knows, the opposition might find some contestants at some point and kick out Harper. In any event, welcome to a local edition of BS 2010. On today's episode, we're going to talk a little about the Hamilton and Toronto municipal elections, or why the hell haven't I started drinking yet? In Hamilton, we have a race that is just plain depressing. Calling it the good, the bad, and the ugly would be an insult to even the worst spaghetti western. In terms of city council, personally I think it's a wash, because I'm not convinced any of these guys know their asses from their elbows. Their baffling lack of planning for the Pan Am Games alone is evidence enough of that, but imagine 3 years of it through recessions and crumbling neighborhoods. In terms of the mayor's office, we have the following. Incumbent Fred Eisenberger, whose leadership when our economy, sewers, morale, and overall local health collapsed, can be summed up with this picture. Former Mayor Larry DeYanni, whose claims to fame are giving us an expressway that has a floodplain 2 or 3 times a year, and being one of the first Ontario mayors in recent memory convicted of campaign finance fraud. Maybe that's why he lost when he ran in the last federal election, too. Then there's relatively new contender, Councillor Bob Bratina, who showed working-class Hamiltonians how much he really cared about their homes being flooded by our poor sewers by pulling the plug on an emergency meeting that was going to fix that. I never thought I'd say it, but the guy from the Church of the Universe is looking better and better all the time. In the meantime, we have a city hall that is not only so obsessed with red tape that is starving the city at the worst possible time, but is also so clueless and self-absorbed that it would take them a year and a half just to decide what to have for lunch. Throw them out! But if Hamilton's got it bad, Toronto's looking at something even worse. While his lead has been shortened somewhat, especially by some of his opponents having the sense to back out and not split the vote, right-wing bulldog Rob Ford is still in the running to become the new mayor of Toronto. Apparently what's driving his support is the rage, totally justified by the way, that Toronto taxpayers feel towards their money being splurged by pointless renovations and perks, and gouged even further by countless taxes and fees. The problem is, like the gangsters in The Dark Knight, in their fear and anger they are turning to a man they don't totally understand. The fact is, just about all the mayor candidates are running on demonstrated records for responsible spending. Ford, on the other hand, is the only candidate who doesn't have a single political accomplishment to his name despite being on city council for several years. I'm serious, pretty much all he does is throw around racist and homophobic slurs, throw drunken tantrums at hockey games, and bully everyone else for wanting to actually build and maintain a city. Perfect, yeah, another right-winger born into money preaching to anybody about supposed entitlements. Oh, and let's not forget that despite the fact that he himself has been in trouble with the police many times, his attitude towards G20 protesters suggests that he thinks the cops should have shot everyone in front of them. I'm utterly convinced that Ford supporters either don't know what they're talking about or they're borderline psychotic. The guy has said himself that his public promises on how to get the budget under control, like eliminating the perks for city councillors as well as cutting back on the number of councillors, will barely make a dent in Toronto's debt. So either he really doesn't have a clue, or he knows that the only way he can seriously change things is to gut to everything, and is just smart enough to realize that admitting to it will cost him the election, especially since many of his supporters are literally one bounce check away from losing their homes. I also have the theory that if Mr. Ford does get the cushy chair at the mayor's office, he'll gain a taste for the power and perks, and suddenly won't want to get rid of them after all. Don't forget that Stephen Harper also campaigned on modest and responsible government, but in reality created the largest bureaucracy in Canadian history, and is spending our money like Donald Trump on crystal meth. No matter how you slice it, anyone seriously expecting Ford to clean up Toronto is guaranteed to be in for a big shock. Either way, everyone else realizes that this guy is not only going to be a huge embarrassment if he wins, but will probably drive Toronto into the ground if he has his way. This is why a couple of Ford's bigger contenders have already dropped out of the race and thrown their support behind the remaining opponents. I won't endorse a specific candidate this time, especially since I don't live in Toronto, it's not fair. But I will say this. If you live in Toronto and don't want your city to turn into a rundown hellhole where the mayor might want to flog you just for protesting, vote for either George Smitherman or Joe Pantalone. Here's another thing I never thought I'd recommend. Since most of City Council hates Ford's guts anyway, if he wins the election, it might really be the best thing for Toronto if they have struck the hell out of him and can't get anything done. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is why I cringe at the idea of getting into local politics, as some of my fans have suggested I do. One thing that has been made very clear to me this year alone is that politics is pretty much just a big exercise in blaming other people for your own fuck-ups. You see, when I promise not to spend money that I don't have, and to listen to the people around me, to commit to a decision, and to take responsibility for my own mistakes, I honestly mean it, and I take it out of the hides of anyone else who doesn't. So as you can imagine, I'm not very optimistic about making much of a difference, even if I would manage to get a seat. Then again, the next city election will be 3 or 4 years away, so you never know. That's it for me.